excited to be here to talk with you today about critical thinking. My name is Shawn Kelley. I'm a scientist in a corporate materials group at Medtronic, and I've taught this class to lots of Medtronic employees, so I'm looking forward to giving you an introduction to critical thinking. I've been a judge and a judge advisor for FIRST FRC competitions for 9 years. So I'll hopefully bring at least some of that perspective into the things that I'll talk about today. So critical thinking. You'll also hear me call it CT for short. You know, some ground rules for today. I'm looking at all of you, all of us who are in the class today, that we're a team for the purposes of teaching this class. And I want you guys to interact with me. I'll be asking for reactions and answers to questions in the chat box. That would be great. I'll also ask for some yes or no answers to questions as we go along. Critical thinking, this is a class about you. Well, about us as humans. And I'm going to come out and say, this class will change your life if you'll let it. And what we're going to talk about today, critical thinking, is how we as humans think and act alone and in groups, and how we make decisions. And it's a big topic, but I'm going to focus down today on giving you an understanding of what it is, what decisions are, if you haven't really ever thought explicitly about them before, and how we as humans go about making those decisions, especially in groups. So those are the things that I'm going to talk about today. So please engage with me here in this, what I want to be a discussion. And you know, what I would say is that critical thinking is a journey. I'm not an expert. I wouldn't call myself an expert. I'm on this journey with you to become a better critical thinker. And what I'm hoping for you to do today is to start your journey or continue your journey if this is something you already know a bit about. So I'm going to start the class by asking you a question, and I'd like you to answer it in chat. What is the first decision you remember making today? Right, the key is remember. All right, if someone remembered that they got dressed, they actually chose their shirt. Getting up. That's awesome. No, thank you for joining. Pausing the alarm. Yeah, that always feels good when you can. All right, so I would point out, thank you for answering that question, and please continue to throw things up on the chat. But isn't that curious? Here we are today in the critical thinking class together. Think about all the things you had to decide to get here, right? Do you remember all of those decisions that got you to the point of sitting in this class today? I know I don't, right? A few things that were definitely consciously made, those decisions by me, right? To be here with you today, to prepare for the class, right? Those were the things that I was focused on, but there were so many other things that happened automatically. And that's what critical thinking tries to point out, is that humans make a lot of decisions in the course of a day. We couldn't get through life without running on automatic pilot as much as possible. But when we come down to critical situations, it's important for us to consciously control the way we make decisions. And that's what we're talking about in critical thinking, is controlling the process of making decisions so that we make more sound decisions. And I'll describe what that means. And if we make a lot of sound decisions, we bias our chances of success. Success in life, success at home with your family, your friends, success in an FRC season. We bias our chances of success in the right direction. We're going to be more successful more of the time. So that's one thing I'd like to tell you about critical thinking. We're going to, by way of another question, answer in chat, please. What are decisions? At their basest level, what are decisions? Why do humans have to make decisions? What are decisions? Vectors is a good answer. I like that, right? A direction with a purpose, right? Choice, yep. So while you're thinking about that, please continue to answer. When we make a decision, do we know the outcome? Do we know what's going to happen after we make a decision? right? So for the standpoint of critical thinking, well, sometimes we have an idea, I would agree. We can infer, sure, not entirely. So for the purposes of today, decisions are predictions. They're predictions about the future. I make a choice. I hope for the best outcome, right? But I'm not sure of it, right? And you hear this, right? The catchphrases in normal everyday language, right? Hindsight is 20/20. We can analyze a decision much more easily after we know the outcome, right? And we say, oh, we made this mistake in the past. Look, I could have done better, right? It's easy looking back. But when we're in the moment, especially say in an FRC season or in a complicated situation, it's hard to know what decision is going to be the best because we're hoping for the best outcome, right? We can't control the outcome a lot of the time, right? Not with perfect certainty, but we can control the process of making the decision that will lead us to, as I've been advocating here, to making more sound decisions and having more often the outcomes that we want to have. So what is critical thinking, right? This is our thinking about decisions. This is the definition that we use at Medtronic for critical thinking, and what I think is a very useful definition. Critical thinking is the set of skills and behaviors, what we do in order to make the best possible decision under a given set of circumstances.
Noah, how are you doing?
Right? So best possible decision, right? We're going to have lots of options. We need to choose the one that we think gives us the most likely chance of success under a given set of circumstances. We don't control the circumstances. That's the other thing about decisions that we don't control. The time, what we know when we have to make a decision, all the resources we have to bring to bear on making that decision. You know, we don't always control all those factors, but we can control the process. And by controlling the process, I think we can make ourselves more likely to be successful.
Yeah.
So let me scan down here. I'm going to advocate for a critical thinking decision-making model. On the next slide, if it'll go.
Okay. I've looked at both of them, both the brands.
Right, so critical thinking. This is a process with these 4 factors that we would advocate for in critical thinking as a way to make the most sound decisions. We're going to focus on the one in the upper left today, group dynamics, but there are lots of other factors: human nature, frames of reference, group dynamics, and culture. Human nature is how our brains are wired. We evolved as humans to try to minimize our deep thinking, which costs a lot of energy, right? Our brains consume a large amount of glucose when we use them hard. And we try to minimize that. We would like as much as possible to run on automatic pilot, and that is a good thing, except in situations which are uncertain, which require judgment. Then it can hurt us to run on automatic pilot. And you'll notice this model is centered around you. And that's how I like to think about critical thinking as an information space, right? Is that we start out with our personal, how we exist as humans, right? Us personally. And then it moves to how we see the world, right? Those are the glasses, the rose-colored glasses that we walk around and see the world through. And then it's how we work in groups, right? Which is hugely important. In an FRC season, you're on a team. You couldn't do the whole job of marketing and fundraising and programming and machine design and driving, right? You can't do all those, or it's really hard to do those with one person. So we have to be good at working as a team. And then culture is what exists around that team. It's the norms and the behaviors that become accepted on the team, but also what's accepted in the environment around the team, right? And so that's culture. And what we're going to focus on today is group dynamics. And what we want you to develop as a good critical thinker is a sense of awareness. That is not only focusing on what you're doing at a time, right, to complete a task, but how you're doing it. The how, it turns out, is as important as the what when we try to be successful. And we're advocating for you to control the decision-making process in those, you'll notice here on the model too, the critical situation. We can't do this all the time, right? If we had to come to consensus for every decision we make in the course of a day, we would hardly get out of bed before it would be time to do it again. But for those critical decisions, that's when we advocate for breaking out your critical thinking skills. So I'll ask you in a few words, if you can, to answer another question for me in chat. How does your team, your FRC team, make decisions? What kind of process do you use? How would you describe that? Decision matrix is good. Right? Did you have a tool for maybe laying down some ground rules for how you're going to make decisions? That's a good idea, right? That's consciously controlling the decision-making process. Voting. Voting is good. But when a decision involves a certain specific piece of realm of knowledge, right? Marketing, fundraising, machine design, programming, driving, should everyone's vote count the same? Should you involve the whole team in decisions than every decision? Right? I think that's something that I'm not going to tell you how to do it, right? And that's another thing about critical thinking. It's about consciously controlling the process.
They'll take an order, I'm sure they'll answer.
Right? So if we start thinking about the decision-making process, one thing we would not want to do is to leave everything up to chance, right? Randomly make decisions. That's probably not the best course of action if we're trying to be successful. Right? But if we are too careful about how we make decisions, we don't get anywhere either, right? We have to make decisions to move forward, right? And the other thing about decisions as predictions that I think is useful in thinking about is risk, right? When we make a decision, when we advocate for the option that we like in a decision as a group, as a individual, as a team member, as a particular part of a team, what do we think about? I mean, can we go forward without making any kind of decisions? No, we can't. We have to take some risk. And when we weigh those options, do we talk about not only the good points of the options, but also the bad things that could happen, the risk, the downside, right? And for us to be successful when we have limited time and resources, we're going to have to take risk. That's part of life. Risk is a normal part of making decisions and being successful. We don't want to fall off cliffs, right? That's the thing that we really don't want to do. It's okay to make a few mistakes, so as long as they're small. But if they're big enough, they can really affect the outcomes of a season, of a life, of a career, right? And we want to avoid those really bad decisions. So how do humans make decisions, right? And so you'll see at the top of this slide, it says seesaw. And that's very intentional, right? We see the world, we observe things with our five senses, and we think about our past experience. We like to be able to compare options. We like to be able to know what to do in a certain situation, right? I've said we like to avoid deep thinking if we can. And past experience is a great instructor, right? If your team has always done something one way, if you've seen this exact situation before, I know what to do. That's easy, right? What about if it's an unfamiliar situation or one that's a little bit on the edge, right? Apples to apples is easy, same to same. I've had this situation before, no problem. Apples to oranges starts to be a little more complicated. How applicable is your past experience? Right? If we think about all the way that humans and the way that we make decisions are biased, right? Cognitive biases, if you're somewhat familiar with this critical thinking topic, right? Those are our experience. Our collective experience has taught us that these shortcuts to decision making are useful. They help us be more efficient, make good decisions more quickly. But in unfamiliar situations, our heuristics, our automatic ways of making decisions, our past experience isn't always going to be a great guide. Sometimes it will be, but sometimes it won't. Right? And so decision making, the seesaw, the other thing about this, it's a balancing act. Right? Sometimes things are really weird and unfamiliar and we just don't know what to do. Right? And that can give you a really uneasy feeling. That's called cognitive dissonance. And everyone feels it and we want to get it over with as quickly as possible. Stop feeling uncertain, make that decision and move forward. That's what we want to do. But in an unfamiliar situation, that can be hard. And especially in those unfamiliar critical decisions, if we go off gut instinct, if we aren't careful and control the decision-making process, we can leave ourselves open to a lot of influences from what we call in critical thinking hidden influences, these factors that we don't appreciate, that are part of decision-making, and that really affect the decisions that we make. And so I'm going to talk to you about some hidden influences. The other one thing I want to convince you of today is that they're there. There are hidden influences. There are things going on in the background that you don't have perfect control over. And it's only by being aware. On that decision-making model slide, right, awareness is really important. That's what we want you to practice. Being aware of what's going on in a decision-making situation, not only the what of the decision you're making, but how are you making that decision? It's this dual level awareness, mindfulness, if you will, that we want you to get good at practicing. And so I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about what we mean by a sound decision, right? I've been very intentional about not calling decisions good or bad, right? But a sound decision-making process, a sound decision, because we don't control the outcomes, but we can control the process, right? And that's one of the things that we want you to think about when you make decisions, right? It's not about the outcome, it's about the process, because we don't know what the outcome is going to be a lot of the time, right? And so what is a sound decision, right? If you have data, if you can use logic to make the decision, my goodness, please do that. Right, and it's very, that's a critical skill to have, is to use data and logic to make decisions. But in a resource-limited situation, we're going to run out of time. We're going to run out of data. We may even run out of logic before we can make a decision and feel good about it. So what do we do then? Right, we talked about risks, that we want you to think about not only the good things that'll happen when you make this decision, but also the bad things that could happen. And maybe we can optimize our decision-making process a little better to limit our risk, to limit the downside things that could happen, right? And the other thing we have to do, and this is a very human thing, we need to put our decision above our own interests. In critical thinking, we'll call this optimizing at the right level. Yep, that's great criteria. That's very much in line from Jerome. Thank you for that. That's very much in line with critical thinking, right? We want to think about what's the best for our season, for our team. We want to think about, is my idea really the best? When we come up with an idea, we feel a tremendous sense of ownership. It's easy to feel like my idea is the best and to really advocate for it. But what we would say in critical thinking is that you should also listen to other people, because their ideas might be better than yours. Maybe you can put them together and have something even better, right? It's about optimizing at the right level, putting the decision above your own interests, right? And there are going to be disagreements when you make decisions. That's just how that is, right? And what we assume, and we assume this is true on FRC teams as well as at Medtronic, that we all have the best intentions. And when we have disagreements, it's probably because some fundamental misunderstanding is going on. And what we would advocate for is that what can you do then? You can ask questions in a non-threatening way. Now, don't attack people, but you can ask questions, genuinely wanting to find out about the viewpoint of the other person. And if we can start listening and understanding each other's viewpoints and putting together that collective experience and the diversity of viewpoints of a team, now we can make really good decisions, or we can have a much better decision-making process anyway. So I won't spend too much time on this slide because I think I've talked about all these concepts, but this is when we think, this is kind of the decision-making space. Increasing certainty going from the left side of the page to the right. The situation across the row, what process are you using, and how can you be wrong, the sources of error, right? If we know something is based on luck, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to think deeply and spend a lot of time making that decision. Right? Similarly, if we know a lot, if we can use logic and data to completely make the decision, do that. Don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Use your data and logic and make that decision, right? But I think a lot of things that we face, and this is real life, is in this middle ground where we don't have enough information, we don't have enough time, right? And this is something I think that FIRST does a really good job simulating in terms of real life. At Medtronic, when we make decisions on projects, it's very much like What happens in a first season with a complete FRC team where you have to worry about fundraising and marketing your team and your sponsors and building the robot and programming it and driving it? All those things have to come together, right? That's true of real life. That's true of Medtronic and industry, certainly. And FIRST does a great job simulating that. But it's in this middle ground where we're going to rationalize when we run out of information, where we're going to have to use judgment. It leaves us really open to these automatic shortcuts, the way that humans like to minimize the time that we spend deep thinking, these hidden influences, right? And what we're going to do next here is I'm hopefully going to show you some examples that point out that these hidden influences are really there. So I'll ask you to react in chat to a few things. I'll ask you to answer yes or no. These will be 4 different examples that I think point out some analogies to the hidden influences, and they give you, hopefully give you a sense that these things are really there, right? We want you to think deeply about the way that you're thinking. So when you see this bar, right, this is an example that's meant to get around if anyone is colorblind, right? That truly is a gray bar. When we see that gray bar as represented on the screen, how many shades of gray are there? Really? I see lots more than one shade of gray. Maybe you've seen this example before. Yeah. Infinite ones. Clearly, some of you have seen the example before. Maybe in the programming of the optical sensors on your robot, you've seen that machine vision and human vision are not at all the same thing. Well, it turns out that there's just one shade of gray on that bar. And it's only in the way that we've showed it on the screen in the context of the other shades of gray that tricks our brains into thinking that there is more than one shade of gray on that bar, right? Human vision is very contextual. Lighting conditions and the things that are represented adjacent to an object really affect the way that we see them as humans, right? And so this is, we think about that. A huge part of our brain is dedicated to vision. We spend a huge number of hours in the course of our life using vision. And yet we can be tricked by a simple example like this, right? And if I bring that background back, it's like you didn't learn anything. There are many shades of gray there, and we can know that there's only one, right? And I think some of you probably do, right? Know that there is only one shade of gray there, but it's hard for me. I get tricked anyway. I still see lots of shades of gray. Right, and so this is an example that's supposed to point out that even though we spend a lot of time doing something, we can still be tricked by the context and by the way that we perceive the world. All right, so we're going to go with another example here. I'm going to give you some instructions. I'm going to ask you to do something aloud in your head. So here we go. I want you to read aloud what you see in your head. Right, so there they both are. What happens when you see those sequence of letters? What do those phrases say? Right, I'm going to make an assumption here. I think we're probably all readers of English. We've been trained to read, right? Can you read this? Absolutely. That's what the mind does. It fills in the blanks. Absolutely. Right? And this is what we do. This is human behavior at its best right here, right? We've been trained to read English. We know to read the words from left to right as English readers. And we can leave out a lot of letters and still know what the phrases are. But think about that, right? Our mind is filling in the blanks. Your brain influences what you see in the world, right? You've made a bunch of assumptions in filling in those letters. There are probably other words than can you read this, what are you reading, that would use that sequence of letters. But look at what we did, right? We probably all agree pretty well what these phrases say. This is what we do in uncertain situations. We fill in the blanks. Our minds construct a scenario where the data makes sense. That's rationalizing. This is what we do. And realize when you're making complex decisions with limited time and resources, this is what's going to happen. And by the way, not everyone is going to do it the same way. So everyone is going to be seeing the world a little bit differently. And it's only by leveraging the diversity of a team that we can reap the benefits of a team, that we get that diversity, we get those different viewpoints. We are able to walk around a problem a number of different ways. And that will lead us to making more sound decisions more of the time. Right, another example. So I'm going to put a question up on the screen. And what I want you to do is give me the yes checkbox when you think you know the answer. So I'll ask you to read the example and just give me a yes when you think you know the answer. Right, Hong Kong elementary school, first grade question. Lots of yeses, a few yeses, right? How many people do we have on the call? Quite a few. We don't have yeses from everyone yet. What parking spot number is the car parked in? Right, if you haven't answered yes, what are you thinking? Do you know the answer? You're just not going to tell me? Maybe you haven't figured it out. How does it make you feel to not know the answer to a question? As a team, does everyone need to know the answer, to know how to come up with the answer? When I saw this for the first time, I'll tell you what I was doing, right? I have an engineering background, and I was trying to construct the formula for what that parking spot number could be, right? What is the math function that would let me calculate what that is? Absolutely, getting everyone to yes is a hard thing to do, right? Because we're fighting pride. It doesn't feel good to not know all the time, right? We'd like to be experts all the time. That's human nature. But as a team, if some people understand and others don't, what can you do? You can teach, right? You can share that knowledge, and now everyone can understand. So, yep, 87, somebody gave me the answer, right? That's great. 87 is absolutely the right answer. And here's what I hope you were doing, if that was easy for you. Come on. Is that you were changing your frame of reference, right? The way that we see the world in critical thinking, we like to call that your frame of reference. And it's only by walking around a problem and seeing it from multiple different angles can we shift our frame of reference. Right? The car pulled in, the spots go from 86 to 91 from the viewpoint of the car driving in. And it's only by changing your frame of reference to see that, right? And I'm sure you've had this experience in an FRC season where you have a problem you're trying to solve and it seems impossible. And you're looking at it from just one way and it's impossible. But when you finally are able to shift your frame of reference and see it from a different viewpoint, all of a sudden, the hard stuff becomes easy, right? And that's what this is an analogy for, that if we can shift our frame of reference, hard stuff can become easier. And it's a really good idea to walk around a decision and see it from a number of different angles, right? Not only the good things that can happen, but the bad things as well, right? What would happen if we make a decision and all of a sudden we find out that we're wrong, right? Do a pre-mortem, the bad stuff. What would that cause if we were not successful, right? Change your frame of reference. The diversity of the team is that not everyone is going to see the problem from the same viewpoint. And by sharing that knowledge, right? And that's a hard thing to do. When we're making decisions, the other thing I would say is that timeliness matters. Speaking up in the moment, sharing your viewpoint that might be very different from the team, from the prevailing viewpoint at the time. It takes courage. It's important to be on point and engage and on time when you deliver that feedback, because after we've made a decision, no one likes to go back and revisit decisions. That's another part of human nature. We want to make our decision and move forward. And if we have to revisit something, that's really, really hard. Feels like doing the work twice, right? We want to avoid that. And so it's incredibly hard as humans because we get fixed in the way that we see the world. And it's hard to shift our viewpoint, right? That's the other point about this example, is that it's hard to change your frame of reference. All right, before we close out, I'll give you one more example. So I'm going to put a description up on the screen. I want you to read it, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Actually, I'm going to, in the spirit of metacognition, I'm going to ask you a question about a question before I ask you for the answer, right? We're thinking about thinking. That's what we're doing today. So this is a question about Linda. Read the descriptor. And then I'm going to show you this question, but before you answer it, I want you to answer in chat. Is this a question about a fact or a question about an opinion? Fact or opinion? Got a couple opinions. A fact?
Sounds like a fact.
Love that you guys are thinking about it. Thank you for answering this. This makes this a lot more fun for me. All right, so we'll see so far. We're kind of split. It's getting towards 50-50. Yep. So I'll tell you what happens. This exact thing happens when we teach this at Medtronic, right? People see this question and think it's a question about an opinion, and it's not. You can answer this. In fact, you could answer this question without that story. I don't even have to tell you a thing about Linda, and you could answer that question, right? Someone says likely and say that led to an opinion. What else does likely mean? Probability, right? This is about probability, and set theory is how this question gets answered, right? It's always true that the chances of a thing being the member of one group, that's always going to be higher than the chances of the thing being a member of two groups, right? Think of a Venn diagram. One group is the bank tellers, the other group is the feminists, and we're asking, right, the feminist bank tellers, that's going to be a subset of those two groups. So this is a question about a fact, right? But what did you do? I'm going to argue that two things happened, at least two things happened. When we see a difficult question, something that makes us think, one of the things that humans do is called substitution. We forget about the actual question that was answered. You'll see politicians do this all the time, by the way. We substitute an easier question and answer that one instead, right? Is it likely that Linda is a feminist, right? Where we think that we asked a question about, is that a fact or an opinion? This second question, right? That's absolutely an opinion, right? And so what do we like to do as humans? We like to read stories. Stories are very convincing to us. When we hear a story, boy, that's a compelling thing and helps us have an emotional feeling, which, by the way, we have to have before we make a decision. We have to feel good about the decision, turns out, that we're going to make before we can actually make that decision, right? And stories help us with that. And the other thing we like to do is use all the information that we're given, right? Have you ever had the case where you have more information than you need to make a decision and you don't know which parts to use? That's another thing that happened in this. It's called the conjunction fallacy.
Critical thinking. For what?
Right?
For robotics and like decision making.
So
you okay?
we like stories, and we like to use all the facts, right? And these are some reasons why we think people don't always make the best decisions, right? Is that we don't take into account these hidden influences, these predictable hidden influences on human decision making, right? And that's hopefully what I've given you a sense of today. We don't always talk about the downside. We don't always talk about the risk. And it's often hard for us to give up ownership of our own ideas, right? Hard to optimize at that right level, the right level of team function or robot design. listening to other people's ideas rather than believing our own. Right, so we'll come back to the critical decision-making model. What can we do about this in the context of group dynamics specifically? Right, these are some factors that we really think are at play when we are making decisions as a group. The norms that you've decided to use that limit the behavior in a group, those are incredibly important, right? What can you do, what can't you do, right? The decisions are more often than not, they're not just binary. It's not just yes, no. There are lots of shades of gray, but the norms can limit your options, right? If you constrain them too much, that can hurt and prevent you from making the most sound decision you could make. Right? And in a group situation, right, peer pressure to conform. And if you don't conform, you're out of the group. Right? Those are things that happen, right? Not on a healthy team, but they're definitely part of human behavior and something that can happen in group life. Right? And authority matters. Who's been designated as a leader? Do they always speak first, or do they wait to hear from everyone else? Right? Authority needs to be consciously controlled so that you don't prevent the diversity of the team from being able to be used to make a really sound decision, right? So authority can force a decision to get made sooner than it should be, can limit the voices that speak, right? Because what we want to create is a level playing field where everyone feels entitled and able to speak up and share their opinion, right? And the other thing I would say that's really important is the power of the default position. That if we've always done things this way, right? That becomes the default, the thing that you're always going to do for all future decisions. It's hard to go against the default, and it can make us feel like if we just decide to continue doing what we're doing, it makes us feel like we made a decision. But maybe we didn't. Maybe we just were operating on pure instinct and didn't make the best decision we could make, right? So if you consciously decide to stay on course or to do whatever you always did, to follow tradition, that's fine, right? These hidden influences aren't good or bad, they just are. And by being aware of them, we can choose to compensate for them and to change the way that we make decisions. So here are some recommendations that we would have for the group dynamics on any team, right? Use the power of the group. That diversity of opinion and expertise is a benefit. Use it. Don't limit what you hear, right? Hear more. Value that diversity, have everyone feel like they can have a voice. A level playing field is incredibly powerful, right? And that is not only that everyone feels like they could speak up, but maybe you have to be intentional as the leader of the team and making sure that those quiet voices get heard, right? Asking questions, not attacking, that can be really important. The way that you ask a question matters. Why did you do that, right? That doesn't feel as good as help me understand. Right? Don't attack when you ask a question. Ask it in a spirit and care about the answer where you're willing to listen to it and have that maybe influence the way that you're thinking about something, right? And this share information and opinions often, that's about the timeliness, right? During it, when a decision is getting made, that's the time to speak up. And when you discuss options, think about risk and not just benefits, right? Also think about the downside. So hopefully this has been useful for you. Hopefully I've presented some new things and helped you have a different viewpoint on how your team makes decisions. You know, I'd like to leave you with another question. And we certainly can discuss any aspect of this that you'd like to now, but how will your team use this to make better decisions in the future? Hopefully you've gotten a few nuggets here today, and hopefully I've inspired you to go and learn more, because this is a big topic. And there's lots of other things that you could think about and optimize in terms of a decision-making process around those other parts of critical thinking: human nature, frames of reference, and culture. So thank you very much for your attention. I'd love to take questions.
So feel free to come off and mute to ask a question, or if you want, you can post a question into chat. Shawn, if they are posted in the chat, we just ask that we read them aloud so that they'll be caught by the recording.
Absolutely.
All right, first, Shawn, thank you so much. This is Alex Urick from 4607. Popped in and out of here over the last hour or so. Great stuff. I always seem to be presenting against Darrel or your session in previous years, so this has been awesome for me to see. It's definitely going to help my kids. But to the other attendees, did anybody else know? I already asked John Stratus. Anybody else notice Mr. Kelley has very similar voice inflections as Mr. Dean Kamen? Like you, there's certain times where I had to turn my head back and look at it and I'm like, no, it's not Dean. So
That's crazy because I assure you it's not intentional.
it's dead on. So no, but thanks so much for this. It's cool to be able to see how other people approach the problems. That grayscale one I've seen before, as well as the parked cars, but I always seem to get those two mixed up or mix up my answers on it. But just to have the kids walk around that problem, right? We've done that with our own team during our build seasons where we literally, with our mentors and students, walked around the robot like, what is wrong with it? So great stuff so far.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, changing your viewpoint can be incredibly powerful. We've seen that I know I've seen that in my career, where seeing something from a different viewpoint can make the hard much easier.
And I just shared out the 3130 decision matrix, the full matrix for everyone to see. And that was incredibly helpful for us last year. It took all the personality out of it and all the personal issues and it assigned the sub team lead and the sub team mentor have the first decision. If they can't agree, what happens and where it goes. And it really made our season very less confrontational in terms of personalities going a little wild because they didn't get what they wanted.
Jerome, how did you come up with that matrix? Where did it come from?
It was something that I led the team in facilitating. I stole it from I've got a master's in organizational leadership.
Beautiful.
So we stole it from some of the coursework that I had. Yep,
that's great. That's absolutely a subject of expertise that we draw a lot from in this, right? And I think people get that in business administration training, and we've seen it come from military experience. But we're trying. It's not something that I think is taught widely enough.
And we constantly had issues in prior years of students and mentors not agreeing. And so on which way to go. And so this is something that we help to really develop. And Alex, I appreciate seeing that. And whenever you need. But this was really powerful for us to bring that personality and all of that stuff out of the process.
Yeah, taking the personal out of the decision can really help optimize at the right level, right? Make that decision the best one it can be for the desired outcome rather than for a person.
Jerome, would it be okay to have that posted at the Jumpstart website as part of the today's?
Absolutely. Alex has already asked, so.
Okay.
And the other thing I'll throw up here by way of slides is, there's lots of places you can go if you want to learn more. These are 5 books that I think are very interesting, and that'll be part of my slides too. Dan Ariely is a behavioral economist at Duke University, and this book is a really approachable way to talk about how humans do things when we make decisions, right? We're certainly not rational actors. It's not all about opportunity, cost, and benefit when we make decisions. Lots of other things happen. And all of these things are really, all of these books try to point out the power of using logic and data, but also how, as humans, when we make decisions, all these hidden influences come into play.
Well done, Shawn. Thank you very much.
Very welcome. My contact information is in the slides as well. And so if there are questions after the class, I'd welcome those and be very happy to respond to them. And hopefully you guys will kind of go forward and learn even more, because you know, what we've talked about today is useful in your professional life and your personal life, your whole life really, right? We can all benefit from making better decisions and in the moment being able to be aware of our behavior and how we're thinking about a problem and how it might be biased and how the behavior of those around us might be biased. It can really help you navigate a difficult, a complex life to your best benefit.
Do you have a particular contact you want to put into the chat? Because I know these, I don't think these slides will be posted
Okay,
immediately
if
to
they're
the
not,
Jumpstart website.
yep, right. So I will put my work address in the chat here. So feel free to drop me an email. Medtronic is a big supporter of FIRST, and it's always very rewarding for us to interact with the teams and the mentors, and it's a great program.